Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was a League Summoner. If you guys enjoyed this what if, and want to see part 5 of it, comment down below, and let me know. The like goal for this video is 200 likes. So like this video, to let me know that you're interested in this series, and you want the next part. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. It was the day after the battle at the park. After the fallen angels had been taken away, things had mostly gone back to the way it had been. Naruto had returned to school, and instantly the moment he walked through the front gate, Momo had gone out of her way to scold him for skipping school once again. Sure, he had a very good reason, but the white-haired beauty had had a firm belief that he should have informed her beforehand, and the fact that he had ended up at the internet cafe for half a day with Ashia really didn't help him much. Now the scolding was not the problem. The problem was having to sit in Caesar for several minutes, and by the time Momo had finished, Naruto's knees hurt and both his legs had become very weak. Not to mention that every single girl had been looking at them in amusement, with the exception of a few, and every guy looked ready to string him up, just because he was getting scolded by the number 1 second-year beauty Momo Hanakai. Once the final bell rang, he had grabbed his stuffs and huffed it out of the classroom and down to the clubroom. By the time he had reached the old school building, he was worn out. But when he walked into the Occult Research Club clubroom and saw Ashio Argento sitting there, wearing the Kuo Academy girl's uniform, albeit with a black sweater vest over her dress shirt in place of the cape and corset, and smiling at him radiantly when he entered, all tiredness seemed to leave him. "Everyone, let's welcome Ashia to our group." Rias finally introduced as she smiled at Ashia as the two of them stood in front of the other members of her peerage, with Naruto sitting next to Kaneko with Hideyumi napping on her lap. "On her request, I have turned her into a devil. She's my new bishop. Please take care of me from now." The former nun bowed her head to them, saying that in Japanese instead of Italian. Either way, Devil's language ability should help her converse normally with them, and the other students of Kuo from now on. "Are you alright with that, Ashia?" Naruto couldn't help but ask. Since Ashia was such a devoted follower of God's teachings, it's hard for him to believe that she would choose to become a devil. Sure, her heart was pure, and devils or fallen angels were no different to her, but still, becoming a devil, I mean. You can't face God anymore, you know. That's true, but Ashia shook her head, and then told him with a very pure, genuine smile, "No matter what form I take, if I can be with Naruto-san like this every day, then I am happy." "Really? I'm glad, I guess," Naruto replied, blushing a little while scratching the back of his head. Beside him, Bakeno giggled softly into her hand at the cute, somewhat embarrassed expression her junior was making. "From today onward, Ashia is also going to attend this school." Rias then continued, explaining Ashia's outfit. "Since you two look to be of the same age, I also made arrangements to have her in the same class as you. So please take care of her from now, Naruto." The blonde nodded. He didn't have any problem with it, because Rias had also made the arrangement with his parents for Ashia to move into their house and live with him, since the former nun still had too many social problems to live alone, and she was the most comfortable with him. His parents had been so happy, and accepted Ashia into their family, as if she was their daughter. "Ah, I see. You can trust me, President." Naruto grinned as he pointed at himself, declaring confidently before noticing the way everyone was looking at him, with the only exception being Ashia, who tilted her head to the side in confusion. I won't skip school again and leave Ashia alone in class, promise. I will put my trust in you this time, Naruto." Ria smiled before she snapped her fingers, making a big cake appear on the table along with several boxes on the floor. "Alright, since we got new members, I made a cake for us to celebrate. Let's eat together." "Yeah." The Occult Research Club cheered, along with Yumi, who had woken up from her nap. Naruto then picked up a plate before taking a closer look at the boxes around the table, widening his eyes in surprise when he saw the leaf-like swirl logo of his father computer's company on the side of each box. "President, what are these?" he couldn't help but ask. "Oh, these are something that I have purchased this morning from your father's company." Ria sat and kneeled down on the wooden floor to channel a small amount of her demonic power on her fingertip and use it to cut open the box, revealing the contents inside to be exactly what he had thought they would be. "With this, you won't have to skip school anymore, and we can play League with you whenever we don't have class," Rias explained, as she showed Naruto all the computer components inside to make an expensive, highest quality gaming PC. "President." Naruto felt his eyes tear up as he looked at the beautiful young woman who had become his master. "Thank you. You're the best." Before Rias could say anything, Naruto had already thrown himself at her, and wrapped his arms around her neck to bring her over in a tight hug, surprising the crimson-haired young woman for a second, and making cheeks redden a little, before she returned her pawn's affection with a hug of her own, making Ashia, who was watching them from the side, pout cutely. After he had pulled back, Rias summoned a toolbox and gave it over to him, asking with a smile, "I trust that you know how to put them together." "Yes, leave it to me." Naruto grinned as he took the toolbox from his master. Ashiya, wanna help me? He asked, looking at the former nun who smiled brightly, and rushed over to help him as Naruto carried the boxes to the side of the room, where Akeno had prepared a row of table and gaming chairs for the PCs before the two blondes were joined by the rest of the club, almost forgetting completely about the cake, allowing Kaneko and Yumi to have the most of it. As Naruto and her servants worked to put together the gaming computers, Rias stood at the door and watched them with a smile on her face. She watched Naruto as he showed Ashiya how to put the CPU into his socket, at the same time bragging to Kaneko how he's no longer a hard-stuck bronze-eye, but a member of Silver Division, much to the girl's surprise. His face was alight with excitement, contrasting with Ria's inner feeling. If only she didn't have that damnable betrothal hanging on her head, threatening to bound her to that arrogant and prideful man for eternity, then she would have joined him and the others. It wasn't that she would be happy with the idea of an arranged marriage, even if her betrothed was a nice man. The idea of being married just for politics was anathema to her romantic perception, and the fact that her betrothed was everything that she was against brought Rias to a point of desperation, as she had no intention of living the rest of her life as a conquest, something that man could just come and take. Thinking about your marriage engagement, Rias. Rias heard a voice and turned her head to look at Sona Citri and her queen Tsubaki Shinra approaching her. Sona, how do you? You always have this look on your face, whenever you think about it. The heiress of the Citri family answered, before she peeked into the room, and looked at one Naruto Uzumaki. Uzumaki-kun is still at school today. He won't try to skip again. Rias said with a small smile before she asked. You are here just to make sure my pawn isn't skipping, are you? Of course not. I am here to tell you that my sister has decided to give the 4 fallen angels your pawn has captured back to Grigori, and let them decide their punishment as an act of goodwill, since it's them who went against their superior's orders to begin with. Rias nodded her head in understanding. To be honest, she didn't feel surprised Serapho Leviathan would come to that decision. Still, can't quite believe that Uzumaki-kun is the one who defeated and captured them. He's amazing. Rias replied with a smile as she looked at Naruto. Even more so than Asahyoto-kun. I don't know, but I don't regret making him my servant. Rias shook her head and answered. Momo told me his demonic power alone has already exceeded your queen, Rias. Sona suddenly pointed out, but Rias showed no sign of surprise. It was something she and Akeno had noticed during his training. Even now, while doing no training or fighting, his magical power continues to increase. Yes, and if my calculation is correct, Rias said at the end of this month, Naruto will have even more demonic power than us pure-blooded high-classes devils. Both Sona and Tsubaki couldn't contain their surprise, as they turned their heads into the room to look at Naruto, who was being spoon-fed a piece of cake by a blushing Ashiya, while he was installing the RAMs into the available slots of the motherboard with the help of Akeno. It looked like she was having a great time. What is his power even? He took up all of your pawn pieces, didn't he? Why are you suddenly so interested in Naruto, Sona? Rias couldn't help but ask. There was no hostile or ill intent in her tone. She just wanted to know, because she could detect concern in Sona's normally calm and collected tone. Don't get me wrong, Rias. Sona shook her head, and said as she used a finger to adjust her glasses, you still need to keep your first bishop sealed away, because he still can't control his power. I don't want the same thing to happen to another one of your servants, and put you at a much bigger disadvantage against Razor Phoenix and his peerage. Rias could only nod her head at that. Sona's logic was sound, and she also had every reason to be worried. It was indeed very strange for someone with no supernatural background like Naruto to become that strong in terms of magical power in such a short time, and that was only the tip of a much larger iceberg that was the vast potential of his sacred gear, Runeterra arsenal, and himself. She still remembered the night that she found him dying near Asahyoto, who she originally wanted to recruit for her peerage. Naruto later revealed to her that he had tried to save Asahyoto from the fallen angel Rainer, and the crimson-haired devil guiltily admitted that Naruto Uzumaki was the last person she had expected to hear that from. It's just that he had never appeared to care about anything but League of Legends. Nevertheless, Rias had decided to save him. It could be said that she, a member of a race that was commonly known to be driven by their desires, were moved by Naruto's will to continue living, even though his reason had been rather disappointing. Like many, Rias had found herself interested in the handsome, foreign-looking transferred student, as well as his cool and somewhat laid-back personality. Even considering him a possible boyfriend material, as she had been free to explore the fun of high school romance and Naruto wasn't a game addict. Rias truly disliked pointless and useless gaming, thus making her lose all interest in him. When she found out that his wound was so serious, she could only save him by turning Naruto into a devil, so that she could use her own demonic power to heal him overnight. Rias had been left with no choice but to bring out her evil pieces. When she thought about it, Naruto Uzumaki was actually not that bad of a choice for her peerage, considering his better than normal athletic skills and close to genius level intellect, which he used to breathe through school like it was nothing, so he could use the most of his time for League, which for some reason he was rather bad at despite having a deep understanding of the game. Ryuz had believed that, if she could turn his strong passion for the game into something else, then without a doubt he would be a great addition to her peerage, even though he had yet to show any type of special power back then. For a human, a pawn piece, or even two would have been sufficed. Ryuz wouldn't feel surprised if Naruto had taken her 2 pieces to reincarnate. But she had wanted to make him a knight alongside Kibayudo, because it was much easier for someone who had no special supernatural power to be trained to fight in the arts of swordsmanship. It was also because she had wanted to save the pawns for Seihiyodo, as pawn was the only piece that she still had the full set of. She didn't know which sacred gear the infamous pervert was holding, but it was so strong she could feel it even in its sealed state. One pawn would never be enough to turn him into a devil, unless it was her brother, a devil king himself, that was resurrecting. However, when the knight piece didn't react to him, Ryuz could only look at the bleeding young man lying on the ground next to her in surprise. Since the knight piece was worth 3 pawns in terms of reincarnation potential, it had shown her Naruto Uzumaki wasn't just an ordinary human. Ryuz had tried the rare piece next, which was worth 5 pawns, but once again she couldn't make the evil piece react to him, and had been left gasping like a fish on the ground. After that Ryuz had taken out all of her pawns and tried 6 on them on Naruto, but once again such amount had not been enough to resurrect him, leaving her heart to beat in awe and excitement. Did he have a power that she didn't know about? Had been the question in Ryuz's mind at the time. She had tried 7 next, but once again there had been no reaction. With a sweaty hand, Ryuz had placed the final piece on his chest, and that had been when all 8 pawns finally shone with a burning bright with a deep crimson light, brighter than any other piece Ryuz had seen. Before she let them sink into his chest, and finished the ritual of turning him into a reincarnated devil, Ryuz could have sworn that the pieces looked somewhat different than before, but they all had disappeared too fast, before she could take a closer look at them. After she had used all 8 pawns on Naruto, she had nothing left to reincarnate as Seihiyodo into a devil, but she didn't feel regretted, or anything as she took Naruto back to his home via teleportation circle, carrying the blonde-haired boy to his own bed, before she stripped off her own clothes, and healed him using her own body and demonic power. Since his power was worth at least 7 to almost 8 pawns on its own, Seihiyodo was worth less than a pawn on his own, so while the sacred gear even in its sealed state had immense potential. It would have taken her tons of works, and plenty more trainings for him to get any form of real strength, something that she did not have anymore. His power had turned out to be one of the strangest things she had ever come across. At first, she had believed it to be creation-type sacred gear that allowed him to create weapons with different powers based on his imaginations. But the reasons that Naruto had chosen to create the weapons from League of Legends had been because he loved it, and they were the only thing he could think of, thus not limiting his ability to his knowledge of just the game alone. However, her assumption had soon been proven to be wrong, when Naruto started summoning the champions, beings with the exact same mindsets, personalities, and powers as they had from the game. After Yumi the magical cat told her that they all came from a dimensional world of Runeterra that had manifested inside his sacred gear, Ryuz had finally realized her pawn's sacred gear wasn't just a creator type anymore, but something else, something that had never been seen or heard before. Ryuz, I am gonna ask Seihiyodo to become my servant. Oh? Ryuz stated softly as she turned her head back to look at her childhood friend, but the crimson-haired heiress admitted that she didn't sound as surprised as she had thought she would. I don't have ownership over the boy, Sona, so you don't need my permission. Good luck though, cause I have the feeling you will need it. I know. The bespectacled girl sighed before nodding. Well, both of them agreed that Seihiyodo's power had immense potential, and should not be left to waste, or fall into someone else's hands. He was a notorious pervert that was utterly obsessed with women's breasts, and a not-so-secret dream of having his own harem. If he accepted Sona's offer, then sooner or later he would become a member of the student council, bringing a bad reputation to the group, and definitely leaving Sona and the girls of her peerage with a lot of headaches and serious problems for months to come. Naruto had his own obsession, but his real personalities had turned out to be much more tolerable than Issei could ever be. Do take care of yourself and your servants, Ryuz. See you later. And with that, the president of the student council left the old school building with her queen, allowing Ryuz to head back into her clubroom with her servants. Although, they both couldn't stop themselves from wondering if Ryuz had acquired a new familiar for one of her servants without their knowledge. Because the sight of a purple cat floating around the room, while writing on a book like it was a flying carpet was definitely not normal even for the world that they lived in. Wait, Set, you promised to hold back. Before Yumi could even finish her sentence, Set had punched the air in front of him, sending Naruto flying back and crashing through several trees with a powerful force. The boss wasn't wearing his metal bracers, as he had given them to Naruto, to wear around his arms instead, and he was also not using even 1/10 of his strength, yet Naruto still felt like he was hit by a full-speed car by the force behind Set's punch alone. That's exactly how powerful was the boss of Ionia's criminal underworld. I'm holding back, annoying little cat. Set grumbled as he cracked his fist. Naruto, are you alright? The magical cat asked, panic swelling within her and book. before the two of them could fly over to heal Naruto. However, the blonde had already stood up and charged at Set, who had a satisfied smirk on his face as he used his hands to block Naruto's series of punches with little to no effort, as each attack that he threw were sluggish and much slower than normal. Set's gauntlets were incredibly heavy, forcing Naruto to promote himself to Rook just to have the physical strength to lift his arms, let alone punching with them. However, the boss had stated this was the best way for him to increase his overall offensive hand-to-hand combat prowess. "You're a lightweight kid, so technique is for you," Set said as he grabbed Naruto's fist in his palm and twisted, forcing Naruto to flip around to avoid having his wrists broken. "Concentrate on that for now." Naruto nodded. For a criminal mastermind, a champion of the fighting pits, Set made one hell of a teacher. Naruto had been training with him in secret every night at the local park since the Fallen Angels and Stray Exorcists incident. Even though he was credited for their captures and defeats, Naruto was well aware that it had been Set who had single-handedly defeated all of them, making the blonde realize that, if it weren't for him then he could have been killed, and Ashia would have been taken away by that group of fallen angels who targeted the healing power of her sacred gear. That single realization made him feel weak, powerless, and understood that he was just not strong enough to protect Ashia and her dream just yet. Over the week that he had spent with Ashia, Naruto had grown even closer to the former nun, who now lived comfortably in the guest room of his house. She came to wake him up every morning, went to school with him, and had lunch with him during lunch break, which was occasionally joined by Momo. After schoolwork was behind them, it was her who duoed with him every day in League, playing support for him as he moved down to the Ad-Kroll, so that the two of them would not be separated. Whenever they won, Ashia just made their victories feel even better with her bright smiles, and when they lost, Naruto just couldn't feel that bad anymore with Ashia at his side, still with the same smile that could light up even the darkest days on her innocently beautiful face. It would be an understatement to say that Ashia had become one of the most important people in his life, right up there with Minato and Kushina Uzumaki. Sometimes, he just couldn't stop looking at her, so much more than just his best friend, a little sister his parents had always wanted for him, or his duo-Q partner in League. That's why he needed to become stronger to protect her. First he needed to improve his strength as well as offensive power, the first step to success for every combatant. So he asked Set, and the guy agreed to train him on the conditions that he would never use his mother to threaten him ever again, as well as a paycheck of 6 gold coins per hour. How in Demon King's name he would find that much money for even a gold coin, Naruto had no idea, but for the time being, the blonde had no choice but to reluctantly agree to Set's conditions. And thus, the nights of hellish training began. Although, Set wasn't the only one who agreed to teach him in their ways of fighting, as Naruto planned on learning and mastering everything that he could learn from his skill-based champions. It's just that the boss was the most difficult teacher to convince. But he was also far from the harshest teacher, whose raw fighting techniques were not the most difficult to learn, unlike the others. However, it was also during this training that Naruto had come to an amazing discovery. The morning in mid-March found Ria's Gremory sitting alone in her clubroom, and let her eyes wander from where she was supposed to be paying attention. From where she was sitting, she could see Naruto and Ashia running track around the schoolyard in their PE uniforms. The rest of her peerage were out fulfilling their clients' requests, so Rias took this alone time to finally confront what she had been dreading to do lately. "Oju-sama, are you listening to me?" Rias was shaken out of her thoughts, before she looked back down at the magic circle on her desk, which was projecting the hologram image of an incredibly beautiful silver-haired woman wearing a blue and white French-maid outfit. Rias closed her eyes for a second, before addressing the voice from her magic circle. "Yes. Sorry, Grafia. I know you are not going to like what is about to happen, Oju-sama, but you have to make this decision right now." Rias leaned back into her chair and said, "You know, if I could actually make the choice, then I would choose to cancel this marriage engagement right now, do you? And you know we cannot do that, Oju-sama. Razor-sama wishes to see you before the wedding, and he demands we do it as soon as possible. So please give me a period of time when you might be free to meet your fiancé." Rias rolled her eyes and grumbled in her seat. So her parents gave her freedom to choose the time to see her supposed fiancé, and not her own life. "And it must be before the end of the month, if you can," Grafia added. Rias thought for a moment, before she said loud enough for the maid to hear, "Fine, I will see him next Monday, after classes. It feels it's like a good time to do it." "Very well. I hope this does not intrude on your day." Rias shook her head, and gave a small smile to the woman that she looked up to as her sister figure, before leaning forward to deactivate the communication magic circle. "Don't worry about it, Grafia. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'll see you soon." And with that, the hologram of the silver-haired maid disappeared, and Rias was left sitting in an uncomfortable silence in the room. She didn't want to let her life be decided for her now that she had had the chance to make it. So her mind started to turn as she tried to figure out the best way to get herself out of this current situation. It seemed she had no choice but to make that decision. Another peaceful week had passed, and another night of training by himself. Naruto returned to his house with some bandages on his cheeks and forehead. Since Yumi had decided to crash in Kaneko's place for the night, Naruto did not have her to heal him. His teachers had also been extra hard on him as well, forcing his body to its limit as they had wanted him to successfully perform a number of techniques before they moved on to the more advanced lessons. His body was hurt all over, but he had no complaint because Naruto could feel that he had become a lot stronger than before. With Set starting to realize that he had no money to pay him, the blonde had no choice but to summon a different champion tomorrow to train with, though he had no idea who should it be, since they all had a strict schedule, and it's not like he could summon them whenever he wanted. How about you summon me next, summoner? You know you want me. Who said that? Naruto asked in surprise, when he heard that feminine and flirtatious voice, standing in front of his house and looking around to see if anyone was around. Hello. But the voice didn't answer, leaving Naruto to stand there in confusion. Though, he could have sworn that the voice sounded oddly familiar. Shrugging, Naruto headed into his house. His mother seemed to have taken Ashiya out shopping, while his father had a meeting to attend to at his company, leaving Naruto alone at home, which he was grateful for, because he needed some time for his wounds to fully heal, or else his family and Ashiya would get really worried, and he would have to explain to his parents how he got them. After eating dinner that his mother had left for him, Naruto then went to his room to change, and found Rias arriving before him using the magic circle in his room, an unreadable but somewhat determined expression on her face. President, good evening. The blonde greeted her sheepishly. Good even. Rias was about to greet her pawn when she suddenly noticed the bandages. Naruto, what happened to your face? She asked in concern, walking closer to Naruto to put her hands gently on his cheeks. I hurt myself while doing my own training, that's all. Naruto told her honestly, seeing no reason to lie to his master. Rias then started healing him with a healing spell and her own demonic power. Better? Rias asked as she took her hands back after a moment, smiling at her pawn as he took the bandages off of his forehead. For sure. Naruto smiled at her as he put his backpack down his table, before turning around to look at Rias. So is there anything I can help you with, President? Rias approached him, as soon as he had asked her that, making Naruto lean back out of instinct, because of the sudden closeness of the two of them. Interesting. It was that voice again, but Naruto barely had time to even pay attention to what it said. Because Rias suddenly told him something that he didn't expect to hear at all. I need you to have sex with me. With that said, the beautiful crimson-haired girl started to undress herself, taking off her skirt and revealing her black lingerie panties. He almost choked on his tongue as he felt heat go to his face, as she unbuttoned her shirt, and once it came off, she threw it to the side, revealing her gorgeous and curvaceous figure. Naruto's eyes bulged out of his sockets, and the blonde found himself lost for words as he was forced to stare at large round breasts, barely being contained behind her bra. Make love to me, Naruto. With that second request, Rias finally unhooked her bra and slid it off her bountiful chest, leaving her breasts to bounce with each breath she took before she reached down for Naruto's hand and placed it on her left breasts. Feeling his large rough hand press against her nipple and slowly sink into her flesh. President, what the hell are you? Oh no, boy, you can't say that. I guess it can't be helped, allow me to lend you a hand. Naughty little devil girl thinks she can make my summoner do what she wants, let's see how she will handle this. The voice slurred, and Naruto suddenly felt his hand moving so casually on Ria's breast, making her moan out in approval. The blonde suddenly felt lightheaded, which reminded him of the time when he used to stay up late all night drinking coffee playing League, but this lightheadedness wasn't unpleasant. For some reason, it felt right. Naruto felt strong, but more importantly, he felt confident. Not that he had never lost confidence in himself. Years of being stuck in bronze had given him a skin so thick, not even the worst flames could bring him down, but the kind of confidence he was feeling was different. It made him look at Rias, and the world itself around him, differently. Your power also works this way, now this is interesting. Nonetheless, have fun, summoner. Can I have a kiss first, President? Oh sure, whatever you. Since she had gotten this far, asking him to help her with something that he would be very uncomfortable with, no less, a kiss should be the least of what she would have to give him as rewards in return. But when their lips met, Rias found herself widening her eyes in surprise. She had intended to give him a kiss on the cheek first, to give herself enough time to prepare herself to give Naruto her first kiss as well as her first time. But the blonde had turned his head at the last second and met her lips in a proper kiss. Rias was surprised by his action, and did not give enough resistance when his tongue pushed into her mouth, ravaging hers mercilessly as his hand greedily but skillfully groped at her breast, stimulating her nerves, and making her lean forward even closer to him, rubbing her smaller, but voluptuous body against his tall, and well-defined muscular form. After a moment as he pulled back, not noticing a thin pink mist moving from his mouth over to Rias, who was left with a feeling of loss, leaving her to moan out in disappointment, while looking up at Naruto. His eyes were now yellow with pupils slit like that of a cat, instead of the normal cerulean blue. Naruto. Rias uttered as she looked up at his handsome, smugly smiling face, suddenly finding him so irresistible. Their neutral but somewhat determined expression from before had been swapped to that of passion and arousal, which clouded the rational thought in her mind, and stopped her from seeing that her pawn was completely out of character. Such a good little master you are, Ria's Gremory-chan. Naruto smiled as he traced his thumb over her bottom lip, making her moan out softly before leaning her cheek against his palm, like a submissive pet rubbing herself against her master as on her lower abdomen, near her crotch. The pink heart symbol appeared, glowing faintly in the dark room. Allow me to return your affection, Rias. With a smirk on his face, Naruto grabbed Ria's shoulders and kissed her, forcing her to move back as he advanced until the two of them were beside his bed, allowing Naruto to push her down his bed and position himself on top of his master, who let out a moan, but otherwise didn't resist. All of the determination and nervousness she had had before, and even after making up her mind and arriving at Naruto's bedroom had all but left her, leaving Rias to feel nothing but need for her handsome pawn, who then raised himself up and took off his shirt, exposing his lean but muscular torso with well-defined, diamond-cut abs. When did her pawn become this fit? Rias wondered before she was able to remember that Naruto had been doing some training on his own. Ah! Another moan escaped from her lips as Naruto leaned down and started tracing kisses on her collarbone, his hand reaching up and fondling her left breast as Rias put her arms around him, not wanting Naruto to stop or even let go of her. Her pawn wasn't skilled, obviously. He had the clumsiness of someone who was doing it for the first time, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of experience. Naruto was rough with her breasts, but not too rough to make it painful for Rias, but enough to make it look like he was asserting his dominance over his master, showing her that she was not the one in charge of their relationship or the current situation, but him. And Rias, for the first time in her life, submitted. Then Naruto found her lips, and the two looked at each other for a second before kissing again, much harder and passionate this time. Their tongue wrapping around each other, dancing and entangling wildly, and sending shots of electricity down both their spines, and making their whole bodies tingle in pleasure. Naruto's enthusiastic tongue didn't take much time to utterly dominate Rias, and shoved itself into her mouth as she parted it for him. His hand continued to knead at her breast, before the other one joined in on the fun, trailing down to roam around her flat and toned stomach, tracing the line down her midriff, before arriving at its desired destination. Ah, Naruto. Rias let out a moan, forcing herself to break away from him when she felt his hand moving even closer to her crotch. Naruto merely gave her a smug smirk in response, before he took the waistband of her underwear, and leaned a bit to the side to push it down over her knees, revealing her smooth and moistened nether lips. From this angle, he could have just taken his pants off and shoved it inside her, doing exactly what she had come demanding him to do, but it would be pathetically boring. There would be no sense of accomplishment if he let his master get what she came for that easily. No, Naruto would conquer this beauty, this spoiled little princess devil who thought she could control him, and make him do whatever she wanted, just because their statuses were master and servant. He would show it to her until she switched from asking to begging for him to her. And so Naruto started, shifting around to a more comfortable position, one hand still around her breast, kneading it with greed borderline obsession. Soon, Naruto had his face buried into Ria's beautiful bosom, making her moan out when he kissed, and sucked at the two twin orbs, twirling his mouth over her teat, and sucking the hardened nub into his mouth as he sunk the fingers of his other hand into the incredibly soft flesh of her other breast. Rias then gave a loud moan and threw her head back when Naruto inserted a calloused middle finger into her snatch, which only served to spur Naruto on, as he worked his mouth over the vast surface of her tits. Her feminine hands grasped at the unruly locks of his spiky blonde hair as he started to move the digit inside her cunt lip. The hard mark on above her crotch shone amazingly bright as Naruto simultaneously worked her body with his mouth and hands. When Naruto added his ring finger into her folds and started using his index to rub her outer lips, Rias began to sweat and moan, her eyes clenching shut, and her breathing grew rapid, before the crimson-haired princess started bucking her hips up to try and match his hands' rhythm, making her feel an intense amount of pleasure. Overwhelmed, Rias yanked on his blonde locks, but Naruto showed no sign of discomfort. After a full minute of doing this non-stop, Naruto broke away from her breasts finally, and leaned up to kiss her fiercely, moving his fingers even faster than before inside her as Rias continued to buck her hips against his hand. Ah, no, Naruto, Grabbing onto his muscled arms, Rias stuttered as she felt her whole body shudder and burn up for a release. With a smirk on his face, the blonde leaned back a little, and positioned himself on his other hand, just so that his master could look at her own pussy as he made her come, squirting her juice all over his hand as he continued to finger her at a furious pace throughout her entire orgasm. After what felt like forever, Ria's body finally relaxed and slumped heavily down onto his bed, allowing Naruto to take his back as he positioned himself over her on one knee, taking that time to look down and admire his master in her full nakedness for the first time ever. It was an undeniable fact that Ria's always looked absolutely stunning, but now, enthralled in the throes of passion and lust with an expression, that of tiredness and satisfaction, cheeks flushing a low saturated shade of her hair and sweats covering her voluptuous body. His master Ria's had to be one of the most breathtaking sights he would ever lay on eyes on. Her shoulders and chest heaved as she tried to catch her breaths, causing her bosom to bounce and shake enticingly, and little could match the half-lidded expression of satisfaction she was wearing on her face, after she had been taken to the world of orgasmic bliss. Before he could continue and get the real fun to start, a silver light erupted from the red magic circle in his room, forcing Naruto to turn his head to the side to look. The one who arrived at his room was a very beautiful woman who did not look a day over her 20s. The cool and professional aura she was giving off gave her the impression like that of a queen, one whose chilling look could even freeze all those who dared to look at her in the eyes. Her hair was a startling silver that flickered and shone under the last remaining light of the magic circle beneath her, flowing all the way down to her back, while at the same time featuring two side braids with blue bows at the ends as her eyes matched the color of her hair almost too perfectly. The maid was the first thing that crossed his mind as he looked at her. Her calm and cold demeanor was soon changed to a look of absolute shock, as she turned her gaze between Naruto and Rias, who didn't even react to her arrival. The woman then set her eyes on Naruto and saw the sly smirk that crossed his face when their eyes met. Her expression hardened when she noticed the menacing aura he was giving off. "What have you done to Rias Oju-sama?" The silver-haired maid asked in a cold tone, one that sent a chill down Naruto's spine, and that wasn't because the temperature of the room suddenly dropped so much he could see his own breath. "Release her." Of course she didn't wait for him to answer her question, and even faster than he could react, the maid was before him. She reached out to grab him, but the darkness around his body suddenly became vivid and enclosed around the blonde, making her hand pass through empty space as he seemingly disappeared. The silver-haired woman had her eyes wide in her eyes in surprise for a second, before she spun around without a moment of hesitation, and grabbed the shrouded young man by his neck, lifting him up, and slamming him against the wall of his room, before creating an ice blade, which she held at his neck. Naruto choked as the woman tightened her hold around his throat, but for some unknown reasons the pain of having the back of his head slammed into a wall hard enough for it to crack didn't feel all that bad. And even while having the tip of an ice blade pointed at his throat, Naruto found himself smirking as he stared down at the woman who was holding him at her mercy with little to no problem or whatsoever, finding the way she was looking at him with her cold silver eyes unbearably sexy. "Impatient, aren't we?" The blonde forced a chuckle of amusement as he pulled back the hammer of his revolver, while aiming at her heart, but she didn't even react as he pressed Blaze harder into her toned stomach. It didn't take it long for Naruto to realize that she could have disarmed him, but chose not to, because she just didn't care. His head would fall onto the floor, even before he could fire his revolver, and even if he were fast enough to do it, she would cut his hand off first, and then behead him all the same. "Try moving your finger," she said as she pressed the blade into his neck. It didn't draw blood, but fog-like darkness. "See what will happen." What a scary woman. Also the reason he hadn't lost his hand, or his head, had to be because she knew he was Ria's servant. I don't think my power will even work on this at your current level of power, so you are on your own, summoner." The voice in his head said, followed by a feat of playful giggle. "Ah, Grafia." Ria suddenly sat from the bed, sitting up a little, so she could look at Naruto, and the silver-haired maid put him. "Hold on a second. What was going on?" Ria asked herself as the hard mark above her crotch started fading away. "Naruto." The crimson-haired heiress called out, as if she didn't notice him till now, looking over at her servant and finally noticing the abnormal features about him, from his illuminating golden eyes like that of a cat, to the pink flame that had formed on his head, and how darkness moved around his torso, while he was being held up by Grafia. Everything about him at the moment just reminded her of one champion, Evelyn. "Stay back, Oju-sama." Grafia stated firmly, "It's dangerous." "Naruto, we're home." But before she could finish that sentence, a voice was heard, and Book bopped into the room in a blink of light before Yumi was seen hopping out of the portal on the page her companion was opening to, holding a small fish in her mouth. The magical cat trotted confidently forward for a second, while holding her head high before Book poked her on the back, causing Yumi to finally notice the current situation everyone in her summoner's bedroom was in. The cat looked around in confusion, before she looked directly at Naruto. The horrible fishy smell of the dead fish in her mouth, however, was his last straw, and it turned him off instantly, causing his free hand to shoot up and grab the side of his face as he struggled to retake control over his own mind and body. The darkness around his body reacted instantly and violently to his attempt, but they were soon discharged from his body along with a small amount of dark purple energy, fading away a moment later, and returning his eyes to their normal color. Wah! Seeing that the menacing aura had left him, and the boy had returned to his normal self, she believed, Grafia let go of his neck, and dropped him on the floor as he let out a gasp of surprise. However, she didn't put away her ice blade, and continued to hold it in her hand cautiously just in case he was not himself once again. "What's going on?" he asked, looking around the room. When he saw Rias, everything hit him. The blonde grabbed his head with both hands, his cheeks flushing in embarrassment as he remembered what he had done. Rias wanted to comfort him, to tell him that it's okay, but even before she could stand up and come to Naruto's side once again, Grafia stopped her with a firm look. Let's leave, Ryuzo-sama. Let the boy sort it out by himself. But Rias looked like she wanted to argue, but Grafia beat her to it by continuing, and we also need to talk. I think I know what you are trying to accomplish here. The silver-haired maid said, but Rias merely gave a shrug in response. If I don't go this far, then father and brother won't hear me out, right? Both Suzuki-sama and the master will be sad after they find out that you tried to give your purity to someone like this. As Grafia said that, Ria's expression immediately became unpleasant. Do not call my servant with that tone, Grafia, and also my purity is mine to give to whoever I want. What's wrong with giving it to someone I accept? Even if I look up to you like you are my sister, I will forgive you, Grafia. The silver-haired maid merely shook her head as she went around the room to gather Ria's clothing, forcing Yumi to dodge left and right while hissing at her in caution. She didn't know what had happened, but she didn't like the way this woman treated her summoner. In any case, you're the next heir to the House of Gremory, so please do not recklessly show your body to any man. Even more so if you are in the middle of this situation. She then handed Rias back her clothes once everything had been gathered. Do you really think that the engagement will be called off if you do something like this? Grafia, did you come here willingly? Or because the house sent you? Rias ignored the maid's question and asked as she started putting her clothes on. All of the above. Grafia responded like that. Hearing this, President sighed as if he had given up, seeing that there was no chance she could win an argument against this woman. Fine, if it's you who personally came to the human world, I guess it can't be helped. I understand. Rias said finally, before looking at Naruto and walking toward him. Grafia looked like she wanted to stop her, but before she could even say anything, Rias had said, at least let me say a few things to him. He's my servant, Grafia. But if he tries to do anything, I will act. The silver-haired maid stated matter-of-factly, with a thin silvery aura around her. Rias just nodded her head, before she walked over to Naruto, kneeling down in front of him, and taking his cheeks into her hands to lift his head up, so she could look at him in the eyes. We're both not thinking straight tonight, Naruto, so don't just put the blame on yourself. I was the one at fault for making you like that. She told him with a soft smile. I'm grateful that you're so willing to help me, but let's make sure it won't happen ever again. We will talk about it later, okay? Yes. Naruto could only nod his head at her, feeling more relaxed than before seeing Ria's warm smile. However, he just couldn't shake off this ugly feeling in his chest. Try not to skip school tomorrow, so I can see you there. With that, she leaned forward and kissed his forehead before she removed herself from him and stood up to look at the maid. Grafia, let's go back to my room. I'm going to hear what you have to say there. Akeno can also participate, right? The Priestess of Thunder. I do not mind. It is an obligation for high-class devils to have their queen by their side at all times. Grafia nodded her head, and with that, Rias said goodbye to him and disappeared into the magic circle with Grafia, leaving the blonde behind with a very confused cat and book. They both tried to get information out of him even as the blonde slumped down onto the floor and covered his eyes with one arm, his heart beating strongly in his chest. Basically, he had a very good idea of what had happened, but he couldn't bring himself to feel any excitement about it, like the first time he found out about his powers. What happened to him? Momo Hanakai asked in confusion as she came to stand next to Ashiya as she looked worriedly at Naruto, who was having his head on the table as he stared blankly out of the window of his classroom. The blonde had always been known as a person of his own world, but this was actually the first time Momo had seen him like that, with his mood so low it was somewhere in hell. I don't know. He didn't tell me. He hadn't talked to anyone since last night. Ashiya shook her head and answered the fellow bishop's question. Since coming back from shopping with his mother, Ashiya had had a feeling that someone wasn't right with her best friend's secret crush, as he went on with his daily routine without even saying a word to anyone. Only Giving9 answer when he was questioned or called, but even so what he gave them in return could barely be considered a half-hearted response. Let me talk to him. Momo put a hand on Ashiya's shoulder and said, but before she could move toward him, an excited squeal was heard, and everyone looked around to see the most popular girl of Kuo Academy standing at the door of their classroom with a smile on her face. Ryo-senpai. I'm here for Naruto and Ashiya. Ryo's informed as she walked into the room, making the students standing on her path move out of the way. We have an important club activity soon today, so I need you both to come to the clubroom with me. She told them, the smile on her face fading a little before brightening up once again as she looked over at Naruto, who was still having his head on the table, and didn't look like he had noticed her. President-san, Naruto-san is. I know Ashiya. Let me take care of him. Why don't you go on ahead? Ryo nodded her head and smiled softly to the former nun, before adding when she saw the unsure look on Ashiya's face, he will be fine. I promise. Hearing that, Ashia finally nodded her head at Rias and started packing her things, leaving the room with Momo, who turned her head around and gave Naruto a worried look before heading back to the student council's office, where her King Sona was having her first meeting with the Seihyoudo. Ahem. The crimson-haired princess coughed softly into her hand to gain his attention, but she still had to do it twice for him to turn his head to look at her. With a hand on the table, she asked with a playful smile, "You look tired. Did you get any sleep last night?" she asked in concern. "President, still thinking about it?" she asked, making his shoulder drop even lower than before. "Come with me. Let's talk for a bit." Rias said and raised a hand to make a gesture for him to follow her. Naruto let out a heavy sigh before he picked his backpack up and threw it over his shoulder to stand up and walk with Rias out of the classroom. The two then walked under an uncomfortable silence, at least from Naruto's point of view, before Naruto opened his mouth to strike a conversation with his master, but Rias beat him to it. "So Naruto, about last night." "I'm sorry, President. Why do you keep apologizing?" Rias asked him, leaning forward a bit so that she could look at his face. "As I told you last night, it was my fault and my fault alone. I shouldn't have asked you to do it with me. But I was the one who let Evelyn take control of me." "Oh no, I didn't take control of you, my summoner. It was you all along. Can you just shut up for a second?" The blonde asked loudly and rather angrily, making the students standing in the hallway looking at him, some in disbelief because they thought that he had said that to Rias, their #1 idol of all people. "Sorry," he said apologetically, more to Rias than to the ones around him. "Evelyn is talking to you, isn't she?" Naruto nodded his head in response to Rias' question. Then again, who else had that lustfully seductive voice but Evelyn herself, an ancient demon who used her voluptuous facade to lure in praise, and then subject them to endless torments. "Amazing." "No, President, there's nothing amazing about having a demon talking to you in your head," Naruto denied. "She's not the only one who can, summoner." "Ahari?" Naruto asked as Rias looked at him in surprise. He could recognize that voice anywhere, but he asked just to be sure, because it could be Evelyn, who was a shapeless demonic existence that could take on any forms to help her in her hunt for the next praise that you. "Oh no, this is still Evelyn talking. Seriously, summoner, you give her too much credit. She's not that good at imitating others. It really is you." The blonde smiled, the playfulness in her tone was unmistakable. Ahari and Evelyn, they were both seductive beings, two of the hottest champions of the league, but Ahari was more of a mischievous fox than a horny and lustful demon with wanton desire for BDSM like Evelyn. "Just concentrate on my voice, and you won't have to listen to that demon ever again." The summoners in the institute can forge telepathic links to communicate with their champions, but it seems it has come naturally for you. "I see. So, when are you going to summon me, summoner? Last time was such a disappointment. When do I get to come to your world and play for real? You're strong enough to call and sustain for me now, aren't you?" "Yes, and I will summon you later, Ahari. There's a more important matter I need to take care of," Naruto told her. "You mean Evelyn tried her mumbo-jumbo psychic trick on your mind last night?" "Yes, the whole institute heard about it. So she did try to take control of me last night?" The blonde couldn't help but ask. "Yes, summoner, but she was unsuccessful. The power to mind control belongs only to Viego." "Then why did I?" "You're asking the wrong Vistaya, summoner. I think you will have to ask the demon herself or someone smart enough for that answer." So he wasn't really mind-controlled, which was a good thing, because he didn't want champions like Evelyn or anyone in general to be able to do that to him, messing up his mind, and making him do things he hated against his will, like hurting those he cared about. However, it still didn't change the fact that he was influenced by her in one way or another, because there's no way that he would find the feeling of being choked and held at sword point good and arousing. "I'll talk to you later, summoner. I'm gonna head out to find something to eat. Summon me when you can." "Alright. Will do, Ahari. See you later, and please, call me Naruto." "Very well, Naruto," Ahari said finally with a fit of giggle that was like a soft melody, making Naruto smile mesmerizingly. Who could have thought that having Ahari the nine-tailed fox calling his name would feel so good? Can I call you Naruto too? So I can scream your name out later as you ravage me with, 'Shut up, Evelyn.'" And with that, Naruto tried to shut the link between them by concentrating hard and imagining a door which he slammed shut in her face. When he couldn't hear her lustful giggle anymore, Naruto was quite sure that it worked and made a mental note to do it again, whenever he wanted to keep his head for the friendlier champions only. Finally, the blonde let out a sigh of relief, before he turned his head to look at Rias, who was still looking at him in interest and amusement. "Sorry about that, President." The blonde smiled sheepishly, while scratching the back of his head, realizing that he must have looked like he had been talking to himself the whole time. "It's fine. You don't have to worry about it. Just make sure to check your surroundings before communicating with your champion, okay?" Smiling, Rias told him, and Naruto nodded his head in response with a grin. The blonde had assumed a more relaxed posture, and he also looked less stressed than before. "President, about what happened last night," Naruto began as he scratched his cheek. He had also been thinking about Ria's and Graphia's conversation, putting the pieces of the puzzle together and coming to a conclusion. However, since he would never claim to be the smartest person in the world, Naruto still decided to ask, just to be sure, are you in a marriage engagement or something? I am, Naruto. Ria's nodded in confirmation. In fact, my fiancé is coming here today to meet me. The meeting will take place in the clubroom. I see. Naruto said, I take that you don't like him very much. Ria's nodded her head once again, closing her eyes as she gripped her bag tightly. She could see anger and disappointment boiling on his master's delicate features. So you thought that, if you gave your virginity to someone, the engagement would be called off, or maybe that guy wouldn't want to marry you anymore. Am I right? Yes, Naruto. Ria's let you a heavy sigh as she nodded her head. Are you angry that I intended to use you for my own selfishness? I'm not angry, President. I'm just disappointed, I guess. Ria's winced a little at the tone he was using, not expecting something like that coming from her pawn. As Naruto continued, he lowered his tone so no one would hear him, but still loud enough for her to hear. I mean, you should have put more trust in me. You could have told me the reason that night before asking me to take your virginity. Had Graphia-san not interfered, what do you think was going to happen to you? You would still. President, Evelyn is called Agony's Embrace for a reason. Naruto shook his head, and stated firmly, I still have no idea what happened last night, but from the look of it, if I really became something like her, then I would have hurt you in the end. Sex or whatever sexual acts that she does are just her ways of luring and toying with her praise, and when she's done messing around, she will subject them to unspeakable pains and sufferings, and that isn't even the worst of it. Do you want the same thing to happen to you? Ria's shoulders slumped. Her body shook as she looked away from him. I'm sorry, she whispered despondently. I didn't mean to. There was a sharp pain in his chest as he gazed upon the crimson-haired girl, making him feel kinda bad. Maybe he really shouldn't have said all that. Such expressions really didn't suit her. All that I ask of you from now on is to put more trust in me. Everyone tells me the Grimoire views their servants as their own family. So why don't we deal with our problem like one? Together. Naruto finished with a grin, making Ria smile finally, before nodding her head at him, and reaching out to open the door of her clubroom for the two of them. At that moment, Ria's decided, whatever problem that she might have, she would face it together with her servants. With Naruto. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.